Okay. So hopefully the audio will keep safe here. So we were looking at, good morning everyone, we were looking at Bechira again, and dealing with a paradox about which the most famous source has become the Or HaChaim in the story of the brothers throwing Yosef into the pit. But without going into the details of the story, the basic paradox is there, irrespective of sources. Can Bechira, does Bechira make a difference or not? Now, this question has two permutations. Can Bechira make a difference to me, and can Bechira make a difference to others? Now, the outline of the paradox is that if Bechira can make a difference, then it seems to have the ability to contradict Hashem's plan for the universe, for history, for our lives. We believe in Hashgacha. There seems to be some form of divine plan and divine direction and divine control. And if Bechira can alter that, then that seems to supersede divine control. And if Bechira cannot alter it, then Bechira can't do anything. And what's its role? What's its purpose? To step back one stage further, I mentioned that in previous weeks, before last week, we were looking at the philosophical problems with Bechira, irrespective of theology, irrespective of belief in Hashem. Where is there space for Bechira? From what does it emerge, and so on and so forth. We've now started looking at the theological problems with Bechira. In other words, within our belief system of omniscience and omnipotent God, how is there room for Bechira? And often missed is there's really two questions over here. The latter question, which we'll deal with in future weeks, is that of Yedia and Bechira. How is there space for freedom given God's foreknowledge? That's not what we're looking at now. We're looking at something else, which is where is there space for Bechira given God's all-pervasive power, and particularly as the God of history with a plan for our lives, the Hashgacha Pratis, the direction. How is there room for Bechira to really make a difference? Now, when it comes to Bechira affecting our own lives, I think we can resolve the paradox fairly easily in a comfortable way. To understand, yes, Bechira choice can make a difference to our own lives. That's what it means to have Bechira. Bechira is that we've been given the ability to mold ourselves and carve for ourselves our own path in life, and for better or for worse. And indeed, the whole Torah is full of this idea that there's paths in front of us, and we should choose the path of good, the path of life. And that's the choices that we make. So yes, Bechira can make a difference to us as individuals. The question is, can Bechira? Yeah.
Does Hashgacha Pratis have to be axiomatic? I mean, can you say that this omnipotent God who does know everything, but it doesn't mean that there is such a fixed plan for the individual? Where would that come up theologically, from our point of view?
You are correct. It doesn't have to be axiomatic. I don't remember if in this forum we spoke about Hashgacha in this forum. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be axiomatic, and it may well be that we choose our own path in life, and there isn't a sort of preordained plan for us. On the contrary, that's what it means to have the gift and the responsibility and the privilege and the challenge of Bechira, that we forge our own path in life. It does, though, get more difficult when we're looking at our effect on other people's lives, because here there is a problem. Here it does get difficult, meaning I have Bechira. Can I use my Bechira to in the most extreme example, which is the scenario that Chaim is talking about, life and death, murder? Can I use my Bechira to terminate someone else's life? And here it definitely gets challenging. I mean, I'm using the most extreme example, but the truth is it applies even in more subtle ways. If I can steal someone else's life, I can take a baby who was due to have a productive 90, 100, 120 years ahead of them, and I choose to end that baby's life. That baby will never have the opportunity to do all the things it could have done, and for which, in a broad sense, at least, whether we think Hashgacha Pratis means every detail is worked out or not, in a broad sense at least, this baby has existence, which has now been taken from it, and it will never be able to go on and do or achieve anything at all. So can my Bechira ever make a difference to anyone else?
And that's my Bechira.
Yes.
And the person that means like to go, I want to see.
So there is a very good point. Let's try and escape this paradox. Let me just first summarize the paradox, and then we'll see what if any escape routes are there. So again, one option is that my Bechira is indeed meaningful, and I can not just mold my own path, which would get down to your completely legitimate point as to what degree is our life path predetermined. And I mentioned Mazal and Bechira and all the various terms that are thrown around these topics. That's in a sense a discussion around Hashgacha Pratis. But let's for now live with the idea that I can forge my own path in life. And indeed, if I choose to do something crazy or silly, I can seriously affect adversely my own future. Let that be. But what about someone else's life? So one option is I can indeed make decisions that can genuinely impact on someone else. Which is intuitive in a sense. I mean, we see this the whole time. I make a cutting comment to someone, and their face crumples in pain. I give someone a compliment, and they are lifted. And those each act of causing pain to someone is a mini murder. I mean, that's what it is. It says mali kotla kula mali kotla polga. The difference doesn't make whether you kill someone completely or kill someone partially. Every time I'm cruel and horrible to someone, or cause them pain, or steal from their money or health or whatever it may be, that's an act of taking. And the most extreme form is terminating their life completely. So yeah, Bechira can really make a difference. It can really do these things. But the price we pay for that is this problem that, was it this person's time to die? Was it their time to end their life? Was it their, and if not, how can my Bechira really affect them in that way and steal their possibility, their potential? So this is the paradox. Now, Avram is right. There is a possible escape route from this. In philosophical terms, this is known as a soft determinism. And it says as follows: I can make decisions as I wish. I indeed have free will, but the end result will be the same irrespective. In other words, if this person was meant to experience the pain, they will get it. If they weren't meant to experience the pain, they won't get it. They were meant to die, the time had come, they will die. And if they weren't meant to die, they weren't meant to die. In other words, God is a supercomputer and more, and there's no difficulty in principle aligning the components of the universe to work in this manner, such that the individual I face, and I am sorely tempted, I have never been sorely tempted to do this, I'm sorely tempted to shoot them with a gun and kill them. God engineers things such that I face this choice at this moment in time. If I choose to shoot them, I will have chosen badly and wrongly, and they will die. And if I choose not to shoot them, they will anyway die. They will be struck by a meteorite. They will suffer a heart attack, and their life will anyway end. In other words, I have complete free choice, but the end result is predetermined either way. And there are some sources that indicate similar models. There's a very famous Rashi al Torah, which is, again, as many Rashis, is based on a Chazal. He talks about someone who accidentally nizdamnu b'punzak echad. Three people encounter themselves in one inn. In other words, the reason it uses this as an analogy of an inn is a meeting road at the crossroads. Travelers from the four corners of the earth who have no connection at all with each other happen to encounter each other. They happen to spend meeting in the inn in the crossroads. And one of them the innkeeper falls off a ladder and falls onto one of the people, and the person dies. And Rashi says, why does this event happen? Because the person that they fell on was a murderer who was never caught, and therefore Hashem engineers things that they are now killed in turn. And the person who fell off the ladder and killed them had once killed someone b'shogeg, but there were no witnesses, and therefore deserved exile. And therefore they will be engineered that this time they will fall off genuinely out of their control, and they will be exiled. In other words, it's an analogy of a capable enough supercomputer can very easily engineer scenarios like that, and this would be an escape route potentially, known in philosophy as a variant of soft determinism, that I can choose, but the outcome in the sense is predetermined or preordained.
How we got down to Mitzrayim, well, it was decreed to Abraham that we would all go down to Mitzrayim. It didn't have to be because Joseph's brothers fell out with him and sold him as a slave. It could have been another way.
Yes, on a national level, I don't think there's anything super controversial about this. The Pasuk already says "Leiv Malachim," right? The heart of kings is in the hands of Hashem. On a national level, I think we can all live with the idea that Hashem engineers history, and even those who are further removed. If we think of Hashgacha Pratis as a spectrum, as concept, to what degree Hashem intervenes in history. And I think everyone will live with the idea that on a national level, occasionally there'll be intervention, particularly around Klal Yisrael as a whole. There's a sort of divine mission and purpose in the world. So absolutely. The problem with this model, and I mentioned this last time, is it means that, number one, it's very counterintuitive. It means that my decisions don't really make a difference. And philosophically speaking, or more profoundly, if I know that these really don't make a difference, it becomes troubling to understand what is the moral component of my bechira, the decision that I'm making. And as if I know that either way, a moral decision normally is thought of as, should I cause the death of this individual or not? And it has a moral component because it would be wrong to bring this individual's life to an untimely end. Now, if I know that whichever decision I make, either way, their time, they are going to die, what is the moral component of the decision? Why would it make a difference whether I do it or not? Now, you may be tempted to answer, it's true, it doesn't make a difference to the recipient of my choice, but it makes a difference to me. Am I the sort of person that can do such an action or not? And indeed, I mentioned there's a Rishon, Chassidai Kreskas, who goes around down a route in his Or Hashem, a path of 1300s, we're talking about Spain. He goes down a path of soft determinism, and he says it's really about what I do to myself, how I mold myself. Makes a difference. But it's not clear what it means to at least for someone who's philosophically minded, it's not clear in what way I mold myself either. But molding self is if I choose to do something bad, I am making myself the, that a good person chooses good choices, a bad person chooses bad choices. But what is bad in my choice if I know that either way the end result will be the same? What makes this a poor choice if I know that either way the end result will be the same, that this person is going to die? Am I making myself the agency of a negative outcome? No, because either way the person is going to die, no matter what. So what's negative in my outcome in that which I'm choosing to do?
I'm troubled by the plausibility of this idea, because wouldn't it then imply that as soon as you have as soon as Reuven thinks he's going to kill Shimon, then that's it for Shimon, because either Reuven will kill him or God will kill him. So as soon as it enters Reuven's mind to go Shimon, that doesn't seem right.
God engineers things. In theory, with a giant enough computer, there's nothing wrong with this model. I agree, it's profoundly counterintuitive, but in theory it works. Meaning, God would, Hashem would engineer things such that I would only be sorely tempted to kill someone and genuinely weigh it up in an option where the death of this victim was a reasonable outcome, because anyway they were predetermined to die. It also relies, by the way, on lack of psychological awareness as to whether I really face a bechira or not. Let's say I'm sitting there grappling with myself whether to murder someone or not, and I really feel it's a struggle. At the end of the day, I don't murder them, and they don't drop dead. So it now turns out that I know that even had I decided to kill them, either I wasn't genuinely facing a choice to kill them, or had I decided to kill them, the gun would have backfired or something. So I take out the gun I was going to use and I shoot it and it fires perfectly. So I now know it wasn't going to backfire. So it means that even though I felt psychologically I was going through a choice, I wasn't really going through a choice, because the proof is the person didn't drop dead, which means I never really all along had the chance to kill them. And maybe they would have escaped. The possibilities are endless, but it does call into question, if you believe that on some level or other, we humans have the ability to rationally navigate through the world, which it seems to be a premise of Judaism, because we have to have the ability to make decisions and think things through. And if we never know what's going to happen, if we can't rely on the very opening words of a very famous Targum, the very opening words of the Torah, Bereshis bara Elokim, b'chokhmasa bara Elokim. Hashem created the world with chokhmah, meaning there's a seder, there's an order, there's a rationality. Right? We have to be able to know what happens in order to reasonably navigate the world. And again, when we spoke about rationalism versus mysticism and so on, and so there's some debate as to exact parameters of that, but there has to be some ability of us to think reasonably. It does become increasingly hard to adopt a position of soft determinism. It's conceivable, it can't be ruled out, but it's a difficult stance to adopt, because the outcome of it is very counterintuitive against our own sense of self as to whether we really faced a choice or not. And most profoundly, it does call into question what a moral decision means at all, because whatever I decide is going to be the same outcome. So what difference does my bechira make? Because it's anyway going to happen anyway.
We have to separate the subject and the object. I mean, the guy that's doing the shooting, he says, well, I'm going to shoot him, but he doesn't know whether it's going to kill him or not. So he still has, when he's at the time that he is faced with a dilemma and he's looking at the event, he doesn't know, he can't be sure what the outcome of the event is. I mean, he could shoot somebody and they can survive.
Yes.
So the subject still has the bechira, but he's got the moral responsibility on him. He hasn't got a cop out because he doesn't know at the time he does the event. He can't be sure of the outcome of the event.
It's true he can't be sure of the outcome, because it's possible the gun backfires, it's possible he misses, possible the guy thing. But whatever is meant to be is meant to be. That's what determinism is claiming. Whatever will be, will be. So yeah, so that I'm not quite sure I understand then what moral weight rests on me. meaning the normal response in soft determinism is, it's true, but how does it mold you? You know, what effect would it have on you to do that decision? And in soft determinism, I might as well say, I'm just going to go and party and have an easy life, because whatever will be, will be. Now, there may be a response to that, which is true, but not how it affects yourself, in the sense of, if you don't work, you're not going to have a parnassa, you don't have a livelihood. If you do silly things, your health will suffer or whatever. But at least with respect to other outcomes, it's very difficult to see why is there a moral choice? Do I shoot or don't I shoot? When either way, there will be exactly the same effect on the person's well-being and their health. And, if I'm going to miss completely, I'll miss completely. If they're going to die, they would have anyway died. If I'm going to injure their arm, they'll anyway have had to suffer a dislocation of their shoulder or whatever it may be. So it's difficult to understand what is the moral component of decision making in soft determinism.
I think a cop out to suggest that both can exist, although these seem to be inherently contradictory. We live in a limited world, a rational world. Hashem is above rationality. In His world, you can have two contradictory things which are both true.
There is when we look at God's foreknowledge and bechira, when we look at foreknowledge and God's bechira, there will be a Rambam that some read as saying that, which is, we're hitting the limits of human reason at this point. And from God's perspective, two mutually contradictory things can be true, and so on and so forth. There is a school of thought that criticizes the whole endeavor, the whole enterprise of philosophy, if you are a Ma'amin and believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because it's assuming human reason as the master of what can and can't happen, and who are we to determine what can and can't happen? If you believe this, don't come back next week. That's a joke. There is such a voice of a very profoundly anti-philosophical voice in our tradition. There are good reasons why I don't think this helps us much. Maybe I'll just step back a little bit, since this is called Life's Big Questions, it's supposedly a philosophy show. No one knows exactly how to translate the word philosophy. I was speaking a few weeks ago and I said that there's many concepts that we can't define yet, we don't throw them out. And I said love and consciousness and free will. We were talking in the concepts of free will and so on. And philosophy is one of those concepts. No one knows how to translate the word philosophy. Best definition anyone's ever come up with is philosophy is what philosophers do. And that's the sense of how we can run it. But more seriously, just if we spend a few moments on this, there was I think I may have discussed this before, the strong, I'm no Breslaver, but to the best of my reading of Reb Nachman of Breslav, he's the clearest anti-philosophical philosopher that we have in our tradition. And he basically argues that the most we can aspire to know in life is that we know nothing. Or the furthest reason can take us is to realize that we are profoundly unreasonable. And all we can think of is in terms of functionality. We shouldn't try and be existentialists. We shouldn't try and understand what's the fundamental truths behind existence. All we can think about is result-based thinking. And by the way, he's a very important voice, even if one can't bear this sort of argument, because one has to consider it. And there are limits to human reason, right? He was a contemporary of Kant and others, and there are limits to human reason, and the Rambam in Mona V'chim recognizes that also, right? The whole sort of negative theology of the Rambam, in which he recognizes that when we come to talk about theology, when we come to talk about God rather, the most we can say are negative things. We can't give we can't give anything positive. We can say he's infinite. Infinite isn't really a word, it's a non-word. It means he's non-finite, because that which is finite, we know it's graspable. But infinity is by definition non-delineated, it's non-graspable, it's beyond, and if it's a non-word, and all the words we use about God are negative words. We may sometimes use positive words, but what we really mean is a negative word. When we say he's all powerful, what we mean really is there's no limit to his power. All knowledgeable, we don't know what all knowledgeable means, because everything knowledgeable is beyond. We can only ever grasp things physically when there's a border that we can take hold of an object that has a boundary, and we can only grasp things conceptually when there's a border or a boundary with which we can delineate it. So the idea that there are limits to human reason is not really a controversial one. But Nachman really pushes a philosophy that there's nothing that we can say within reason. By the way, the and this is a terrible travesty of I think of human outcome, but the nanach that you see just dancing in the streets and so on is really a reflection of this philosophy taken to the extreme, which is the most we can do is just dance and just be happy and so on. Yeah, I'm not. I'm just saying it seems to go quite far in that particular group. Now, Rav Nachman's whole story is to express these ideas because he wanted to avoid philosophy. He was profoundly critical, by the way, of the Rambam's way of looking, probably the harshest critic in the last few hundred years. And have I spoken about Rav Nachman? We discussed his stories before. I'll just share some of his stories just because they're very interesting. He tells a story of a king. But by the way, before I proceed this, some of these stories link to mental health, and I'm always conscious when I talk about mental health. It's very easy just to sit here calmly talking about it, nothing I'm saying here, I'm speaking philosophy here or anti-philosophy in the context of Nachman. I'm not talking about practical implications around mental health at all. He tells a story of a king who has a dream, and in the dream the king is told that all the wheat in the world or in his country has been infected by certain sorts of fungus, and anyone who eats it will lose their ability to reason, will lose sanity. So the king doesn't know what to do. He's sort of gutted about this, and he calls his closest advisor and says, "We need to talk this through." So the advisor's first response is let the whole country know that the wheat is infected and we can't eat wheat next year. And the king says, look, if we do that, there's going to be riots, there's going to be revolution, the whole economy is going to be a wreck, the whole, like what's going to be? I mean, there'll be famine, there'll be a complete disaster. So the advisor says, you're right. I guess we'll have to let the population eat it, but you and I will store food for ourselves, so at least we'll be okay. So the king says, like, what sort of life is this going to be for you and I to be sane while the whole country is locked in insanity? There's I don't want that option. So eventually the advisor says, you know what, we're also going to eat the wheat, but we're going to put a mark on our foreheads. And at least, even though everyone else sadly will lose their reason, at least you and I, when we look at each other, we will know that we are insane, that we will know that we have lost reason. End of story of Rav Nachman. And this is very typical of Rav Nachman's story. I mean, it's just awful. Rav Nachman basically in this story is saying the greatest wisdom we can achieve is to have that mark on our forehead, that we at least can look at each other and know, you know what, at least we're the wise people that know that we have no wisdom. That's Rav Nachman's bleak story. He has another story, a quite famous story because it's interpreted. And by the way, what part of the difficulties with his stories are they're all open to multiple interpretation. That's what storytelling is about. He has another story in which he talks about a king whose son, the prince, loses his sanity and goes and sits under a table and thinks he's a turkey. And he's sitting under the table, unclothed, you know, wagging his wings, you know, gobbling like turkeys gobble. I don't know how turkeys gobble exactly. And the king is devastated. This is just terrible. This is how the prince is behaving. And he brings all the best doctors in the world and all the wise people, and no one can sort this problem out. One day, a wise man turns up, and he says to the king, "I have a way of curing your son, but I can only do it if you promise not to interfere in my therapy." King agrees. What choice does he have? So the wise man strips off, gets under the table, begins waving his arms, and also going, So the king says to the wise man, what are you doing to my son? You're just making things worse. You're making a fool of me. And the wise man said, sorry, your majesty, you gave your word, you're not going to interfere. Let me be. The king gets back. Okay, so the wise man is now sitting next to the prince under the table. You know. After a few days, the prince turns to him and says, sorry, what do you think you're doing? So he said, I'm a turkey. So Prince looks at him, great, he's quite happy, he's now got some companionship, and they sit there in peace under the table, turkeying away. One day the wise man turns up, and this time when he sits under the table, he's wearing some underwear. So the prince said to him, I thought you said you're a turkey, what's going on over here? He said, I am a turkey, but who says turkeys can't wear underwear? Okay, see if we can. Prince puts on some underwear. A bit later, a few weeks later, the fellow turns up, the wise man turns up fully clothed, the prince gets fully clothed. The bit later, the wise man turns to the prince and begins sitting at the table, and the prince says, why are you sitting at the table? He says, well, who says a turkey can't sit at the table? And before enough time has passed, several months have passed, and the prince is behaving on a functional level, wearing clothes, eating normal food, having normal conversation, because who says turkeys can't speak, doing everything. And he went on to have a successful reign as a wise and thoughtful and capable king, convinced through his whole life that he was a turkey. So ends the story of Rav Nachman. In other words, he's bringing out a point that you can have this delusion that you're a turkey, You don't need to fix the problem in the existential sense. All the other doctors are trying to heal this delusion that this prince has, that he's a turkey. The wise man says, I'll get you back to functionality and I'll leave you with delusion. Who cares? We all have delusions. What difference does it make as long as on a functional level you're working? Okay. So this is another story of the nothing. Therapists have used it, by the way, to bring out a very profound therapeutic point. There are schools of thought and therapy that believe you can only really ever bring someone out from a very dark place if you enter into it with them. And if there's an extreme of therapy, of empathy, in which you're down there under the table, also flapping your wings and so on. And all therapy on some level or other works with therapists who is able to sort of, or many schools of therapy at least, work with therapy if they're able to sort of enter into the world and the mindset of the person who's suffering and somehow bring them out from that. Now, again, I'm conscious that we're talking here about matters that have a very real and live impact on people. So I'm not trying to draw out anything psychological here, other than to say that in this story, and countless other stories, by the way, from Nachman, in which again and again he sort of pushes this argument that we're making a mistake when we think in categories of reason and unreason and sanity and insanity. It's just flawed thinking. That the greatest wisdom we can get is to know our limitations. Greatest wisdom we can get is to know, and therefore Rav Nachman's argument is that the whole endeavor of trying to define and categorize and philosophize is a mistake. It's simply unreasonable. The counter argument is that that this is neither conceptually correct nor theologically correct. It's not conceptually correct because even the ability to reason against reason or use stories and analogies to argue against reason is built on reason, is built on logic. In other words, the idea that somehow we can use logic to disprove logic or reason to disprove reason is untenable. What other tools do we have of reasoning other than tools of reason? And even when Rav Nachman is trying to adopt an extreme counter-reason stance, the only tools of argument he can put forward are those of reason. If we genuinely believe in an inability to say or think anything, then we curl up in a corner and cry. We cease to think or say. So you can't argue for a philosophy, an anti-philosophy philosophy. As soon as you're arguing, you're falling into being a philosopher, whether you like it or not. And then all you are is an anti-philosophy philosopher, but you are trapped in the world of reason. So this is a sort of conceptual problem with it. A theological problem with it is that the whole Torah seems to be predicated on our ability to categorize and label. The very first chapter of you are in denial. If you deny reason and meaning of words, you're in denial of Ma'aser Bereishis, of the act of creation of the world, and you're in denial really of the whole realm of Torah and mitzvahs. You're in denial of the first chapter of Bereishis because the Torah says that Hashem did create things. Bereishis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'haaretz. It means there's something called Shemayim and something called Aretz. There's something called Mayim and there's something called the sun and the moon and the stars. And there's something called animals, and these have definitions, and these have contents to them. That the sun isn't an animal, and stars isn't water. These are different concepts. As soon as you enter into a realm of words, and creation, that means there are limitations, and there are delineations, and there are boundaries. Now, it may be profoundly paradoxical and problematic to understand how an infinite God can bring finiteness into existence, but that is what the first chapter of Bereishis is claiming. In the statement Bereishis bara Elokim, it's claiming that infinity gave way to that which is finite and brought into existence that which is finite, and there are classes. To put it differently, every mitzvah demands of us to be a London, to be a definer, to be a philosopher. It's a profoundly un-Londish claim, Rav Nachman's claim. It's a profoundly unphilosophical claim. It's decrying the possibility of having words. There's halachas. The halacha says when you make kiddush, you have to use wine or grape juice. I mean, there's something called wine or grape juice which we have to define. And if it's orange juice, it's not wine. And if it's water, it's not wine. And if it's animal pelt, then it's not wine. The halacha is you have to total in a mikveh made of water. If it's water, it's water. If it's ice, then you need to work out is snow water or not water. If it's oil, then it's not a kosher mikveh. So things have definitions. Words have meaning, and if they don't have meaning, then the halachic system falls apart. There was a powerful trend of antinomianism, they call it in philosophy, a sort of denial of delineation and boundaries in early Hasidus. By the way, I should stress here, nothing I'm saying here, and I mean this with 100% sincerity, is meant to take sides in the debate between Hasidus and non-Hasidus, or indeed even to be a remote criticism of Rav Nachman. I'm simply a spectator observing, towering figures of Jewish thought. But I do want to explain why Rav Nachman's philosophy was rejected, or anti-philosophy was rejected by most thinkers. We were talking about halacha and halacha boundary. So in early Hasidus, there was a trend to deny categorization. Rav Nachman wasn't coming from nowhere. He was maybe the most powerful expression of a trend that had its undercurrents in the very profoundly mystical view of early Hasidus. Mysticism is lots of things. Again, mysticism is one of these words that no one exactly knows how to define. Like philosophy, mysticism is what mystics do. But mysticism at some level is an attempt to cleave to the divine, to cleave to that which is beyond rationalism. And Hasidus was a mystical movement, and therefore was an attempt to still the voices within oneself, there's still sounds, there's still words that define and delineate and narrow and carve off and separate. And there was a fear, wrongly or rightly, as a matter of debate amongst historians, that early Hasidus had an aspect of antinomianism to it. Antinomianism means a breakdown of the law. In other words, even was disagreeing with halacha. Don't forget, Hasidus is not that long after the Shabtai debacle, in which he was explicit that for mystical reasons he was cancelling halacha, and matir isurim, that which was also became mutter, and on Yom Kippur one should engage in the worst and most promiscuous sorts of sins in the name of religion. He said this is the most profound mystical level imaginable. Is to rise above the narrowness of halacha and to cleave to the divine in a manner which breaks all boundaries. And there was at least a suspicion that early Hasidus had aspects of it to it. Now, no one for a second should think that it took this to an extreme, but it had doctrines of Aveira Lishma, right? The sin that was done for the best of intentions and so on. And therefore, there were hints to external observers of Hasidus, like the Vilna Gaon, that panicked these observers into thinking that if you take mysticism too far in a too superficial manner and publicize it, you end up in antinomianism, in defiance of the law. Again, I'm God forbid not suggesting that this was a prevalent current or taken to an extreme, but maybe there were elements of it in early mystical thinking, and Rav Nachman was an extreme expression of this. We believe that inherent in halacha is the ability to define. Inherent in Ma'aser Bereishis is the ability to define. And not only that, but we believe that we have ownership of words, of concepts. In other words, when Hashem says to us, when Avram turns to Hashem and says, "Hashofet kol haaretz lo ya'aseh mishpat," he's saying, Hashem doesn't respond to him, "Who are you, little Avram, to argue with me? I define mishpat." Avram says to Hashem as follows: "You told me you are shofet. You told me you do mishpat." Now that only has meaning if I can know to some degree or other what the word mishpat means. I'm not claiming to be infallible. I'm not claiming I know everything. In fact, Hashem ultimately does destroy Sodom. Avram is wrong and Hashem is right in this, right? Of course. But he says if it's to have meaning, when Hashem tells us something about himself, it has to at least have some vague meaning. And what you're doing is so far from what I'm the owner of the word mishpat. We humans own words, because if God chooses to communicate to us in words, he's given us ownership of the words. We know what these words mean. We have ownership of words. If you tell me you're shofet, does mishpat, I can turn to you and say this isn't mishpat, at least as far as I understand. And therefore, what's going on over here? What content does this have? How can this make sense? Let me put this differently. Halacha can tell us to do anything, right? If halacha tells us to treat this table as if it was a cow and put it in a barn with hay, it can tell us to do that. Fine. If for whatever reason there was such an halacha, let it be. One thing it can't tell me that this table is a cow, because I know what the word table means and I know what the word cow means, because this is human. We own these words. You can learn a halacha, and the Gemara or the halachic source can say it's a chok, it's a gezeres hakosov. We don't know what it means. This is just what you have to do. It can tell us it can tell us to do anything it wants, but it can't tell us that words don't mean words. It can't tell us that a table is a cow, because it isn't. We know, we own these words. We own the meaning of these words, and a table is not a cow. These are two different concepts. Now, sorry, someone wanted to, yeah.
Meanings themselves, you can take a word and Hebrew, and when we did the words, the roots of Hebrew words
Yes.
can have 5 different meanings.
If,
And therefore, when you're saying that, then you're open to 5 different interpretations.
philosophy has arrived at a conclusion that we don't know ultimately how to define anything. In that sense, the critique of philosophy is accurate. So we take a simple concept like water, and you ask yourself, so you ask someone in 2023, what does water mean? And they'll say H2O. Now, this is simply out of line with how all of human history has ever used the word water, because there's no water that runs from our tap that's H2O. And to get hold of pure H2O, you have to spend a lot of money to get purified water that has absolutely nothing else mixed into it. The water that runs out of our tap is a blend of a lot of H2O, but all sorts of other chemicals mixed into it, right? It's hard water, it's got lime, and it's got soft stones, and it's got, maybe added into it is some chlorine or whatever it is, or fluoride. It's a complete blend of things. So what do we exactly mean by the words water, and how far can you stretch water till it ceases to be water, right? If you go to a muddy well in a water deprived area of the world, and you draw water which is mixed with mud, it's still water. At what point does it cease to be water? Gold. So the gold that was referred to as gold throughout the ages isn't pure gold. It's got all sorts of other things mixed into it. So even very basic concepts, we've recognized that we don't know how to define completely. And it's true that in Lashon HaKodesh, we according to the Kabbalah, the way words are used refers to some rarefied or purified abstract concept of what this means. A circle. There's never been a perfect circle in the world, and to the best of our knowledge now, we now think based on quantum mechanics there never will be. It's impossible for there to be a perfect circle because there's quantum. There's always a bumpiness to the circle. It's never a perfect circle. There's no perfect point. There's no perfect straight line. So whichever realm we talk about, mathematical or just simple like water and gold in day-to-day life, we don't fully know how to define things. The fact that we don't fully know how to define things, mishpat, justice. Do we really know how to fully define justice? No. Does that mean that we're incapable of saying this is unjust? No, we can say that. Does it mean we're capable of saying this isn't water? We can say that. Just because we don't know where to draw the boundaries doesn't mean we can't say anything about it. And this is the in that sense we own words.
It takes words and gives them a different meaning. So when it says I don't actually mean that.
2 points. First of all, halacha can never do that. It can never do that. It can tell you you've misunderstood what a word is, right? You thought PAIN meant pain, but you didn't realize it was in French and it meant pow, which is bread. You can I'm not claiming that you can't misunderstand ideas. I'm simply saying that ultimately we humans are the owners of concepts. That's the gift we've been granted by Hashem in him creating us with rational minds. Or if you want to say that on the Torah language, that's the gift we've been granted by Hashem choosing to speak to us. As soon as he chooses to speak to us, this is the real reason why a dover and daber is the same root. When Hashem speaks to us, the daber, the Mekabalim point out, it's the same word as a dover, a thing, because speech defines thingness and thingness defines speech. And Hashem choosing to grant us the gift of speech. By the way, many thinkers think that the Tselem Elokim Vayipach Ba'apav, when Hashem breathed into humans, Nefesh Chaya, the living soul, the Targum says Ruach Memalalas, a speaking spirit. Speech, I don't just mean the ability of our jaws to mold and tongues and lips to mold sounds. I mean, behind speech lies conceptual reasoning. A child of one that's learnt a few words is an incredibly profound conceptual thinker. The concept of concepts is godliness. That's what this idea is saying. What it means is God has given us genuine ownership over something, and the ownership is ownership of reason. I'm saying this all because even if this means we're not today going to get to the resolution of these paradoxes, the whole of this discussion is predicated on us being able to use words and talk about concepts. And
but we're kind of deify. We have to live in a rational, defined world. But if we're saying that's all there is, that's kind of.
We're not saying it's all there is, but we are deifying ourselves. We are saying that God has shared of his godliness with us. He's given us ownership over something. He's given us one would be a fool to think that we can reason anything out, that we know what everything is. But equally, if we know nothing, then there's nothing for us to say or do. Then we surrender into a realm of insanity, which is Rav Nachman in a way is arguing that's the best we can achieve, or maybe he's arguing that. Again, I'm no expert on Breslov thought, but if we adopt that stance and we enter a realm of silence, there's nothing for us to say or do. I don't want to share this. This is very classic philosophy. There's a series of paradoxes that I don't know, university students like talking about on over a beer late at night, and I think they've discovered a sort of new realm of philosophy. The realm of I think I have spoken about this before, actually, this topic. Can God create a stone he can't lift, or can God make a square triangle, or can he make 1 and 1 equal 3? And this whole sort of a realm of questions. And the idea is to pose a paradox Mimonoshach, whichever way you look at it. If you say God can do it, then what does that mean? Where is it? And if you say he can't do it, then he's limited. So just, can God make another God, right? So if he can't do it, then then can God create a stone he can't lift? If he can't do it, then he's limited in his power. If he can do it, then he's limited in his power. And this sort of thing. So Sadi Gon spoke about this more than 1,200 years ago, and he's got a sefer called Emunah V'Deus, Belief and Knowledge, and in it he says that he really says the idea that we're saying now over here, that it is true that on one level we recognize that God is above time and place and concepts and logic, but to the degree that we're posing the question and we're using words, that means we're operating in the realm of reason. And in the realm of reason, there is no such thing as a square circle. So this isn't a limit of God's power. There's nothing that God can't do because there is no square circle. So it's not a limit. Let me explain this more superficially and then more profoundly. If I say to you, can God create a choli? And you say to me, Rabbi Zobin, what's a choli? And I say, I have no idea, but can he create it or not? It's not a question that you can answer because I've just said an incoherent sequence of syllables that don't carry any content. There's no limitation to God that he can't create a choli because it carries it's a contentless term, it's a contentless phrase. There is no meaning to that word. God can't create it. There's nothing there in it. There's no content behind it. But a square circle is exactly the same thing. It contains syllables. You can separate it. A square is a concept, a circle is a concept, but a square circle isn't a concept because a circle means non-square, and a non-square. Can you create a non-square square? That's a meaningless sequence of sounds that carries no content to it. There's no limitation to his power. In other words, in a sense, God is bound by logic to the degree that we are expressing concepts of logic, to the degree that we're talking. I can't, to put it more accurately, to add on the insight of the Rambam, negative theology, the better way to say it is not, God forbid, to say he's bound by logic. It's the better thing to say is he's not bound by logic. Meaning to say, to the degree that I use words, I'm living in a world of words. Yes, words are brought about post-creation, but in that post-creation world in which I have the ability to think and reason, he isn't not bound by that reason. I can recognize abstractly that there's a world beyond reason in which he isn't bound by anything, but by definition, I can't think or talk about that world because it's a world in which speech breaks down because there is no reason there. So if we choose to operate in a world of reason, we can say statements like God can't create a square circle. If we choose to operate in a world beyond reason, there are no squares and circles there, and therefore what you're talking about. So either way, the answer to the question is no, says Rav Sadigan, no, he cannot create a square circle, and he cannot create a stone he can't lift, because saying a stone that he can't lift is another way of saying a stone which anyone, a being that can lift all stones, is there a stone that they can't lift? It's a contradiction in terms as much as a square circle is a contradiction in terms, and therefore no, he cannot do that. Categorical answer in Jewish philosophy. Does that mean that there's a limit on God? It's not a limit on God, because if I wish to enter the realm of infinity, there are no stones and there are no squares and there are no circles, and therefore the whole conversation breaks down. So the degree that I'm talking about squares and circles, no, he cannot create a square circle, he can't make 1 and 1 equal 3, and the like. And this is the basis of the gift of rationality that we've been given, the gift of reason. And by the way, the Torah says is that Hashem turns to us and says, I am Tov. We say this in davening, Tov, Yotzar, Kavod, Shema, etc. Tov, Hashem defines himself as good. If the word good means nothing, then he's told us nothing. He hasn't communicated anything to us. It must be that the word good carries some content to it. How much content to it? Maybe very little. All of us in this room could quibble over what's good and what's not good, and we can think of case studies where we really are unsure whether it's good or not good, and conflicting morals and everything else. But it has to carry some sort of content for it makes sense for God to say, I am good. Or Hashem says to us, Bechata b'chayim, or Bechata b'tov, that which is good. There has to be some meaning to the word good, if any sentence in the Torah is to make sense. And as soon as there's a sense to it, it means that we have the ability to carve out a space. And even God himself can't turn to us and say that which is bad is good. It's not. There's good and bad. We have to recognize our limitations, like Avram had to recognize his limitations. Recognize he doesn't understand the situation in Sodom. There's many factors at work here. But at core, we have to be able to have words. Words have to have meanings. Otherwise, we surrender the first chapter of Bereshit. We surrender creation. We surrender use of language. We surrender good and evil. We surrender halacha and mitzvahs. There's nothing else to talk about, and all we can do is enter a realm of silence in which reason doesn't work. So this is the basis of Jewish philosophy. This is why there's an endeavor called Jewish philosophy. And this is the reason why we can't just answer, why should these concepts contradict each other in the realm of Hashem? In the realm of Hashem, they don't contradict each other because these concepts don't exist. Once you're in the realm of infinity, language breaks down, as the Rambam points out. As soon as we enter the world with finite and we believe that we can say words in words of meaning, and they can't contradict each other themselves.
Usually in the Beis HaMikdash, there were 3 million, however many million people in a room like this, or maybe bigger than this, and they all had room to bow down.
Yes.
So that's, if that happened, that itself is saying a circle.
A miracle is in the realm of nature, scientific contradictions. It's not in the realm of logical or reason contradictions. Now, how to deal with miracles, it depends on how far you take rationalism and mysticism and the Rambam and Monavuchim and other ideas that we've spoken about. But in principle, a miracle isn't a logical paradox. Logical paradoxes or definitional paradoxes, like a square circle, which is another way of saying a square non-square, that's what we're talking about. That's what Sadia's point is. It's not getting into dividing about things. This is, by the way, what I'm saying now is not caught up in the debate between the rationalists and the mystics, because even Jewish mystics and believe in halacha, right? Unless you go very far into mysticism, and then it's kind of, halacha, by the way, limits the degree to which Jewish mysticism can go, and this is why what ultimately defines what we would refer to as within the realm of Judaism. And really, when you look at divides and splits and schisms that haven't healed in Judaism, it always gets down to halacha. And the reason for this is because at the end of the day, you can pontificate and philosophize as much as you want, and it will affect life. Obviously, we look at different, streams within Orthodoxy, and you see very significant impacts on life and how people behave. But halacha always provides a bedrock of an ad kan v'sulo, how far things can go. The rupture over Hasidus really came to the fore, not over philosophical ideas, but over the fear that this would impact on halacha. In other words, will you take your publicizing of mystical ideas and you're living in a world of mysticism so far they will end up in Avera Lishma, they will end up in antinomianism, in bashing the halakhic system. As soon as that fear disappeared, the controversy over Hasidus died down. Did everyone like Hasidim? Did people like them? Did they disagree? Well, are Litvak going to be Hasidim? Absolutely not. We'll disagree, but we're comfortable to disagree. We'll agree to disagree because halacha has earthed us. So halacha acts as a boundary to how far a mystic. You can sit on top of your pole going all day. And in Judaism also, but then you'll have to get down in order to get to Mariv on time. So there's going to be a limit to how far it allows you to mystical union with the divine is consciously controlled by halacha and delineated into a set parameter. And that's why ultimately, in a sense, we Jews aren't complete mystics, we're not complete philosophers. It's a plumbing system, halacha. It's a practical, hands-on, earthy system, and that limits how far these things go. Sorry, you wanted.
No, especially when it didn't state clearly in Bereshit that, because there was it a medrash that Adam gave the names to the animals.
It's a medrash. Yeah. But it fits this idea again. It's human. Yeah. The pasuk says V'yikom Shemus. The medrash says it means that you created the existential names of it. Yeah.
In relation to David's point, Rabbi Moshe says that miracles do not come to demonstrate that Hashem can do anything. We know that already. He said that basically the miracles are nature, is an existence of nature itself. In other words, the two are the same. Nature and miracles are one and the same. It's just our perception of it.
So there's a whole trend of machshava that goes down this route. The Rambam in his own way says that a different thing to say in different ways. But all I'm pointing out is that miracles is a different conversation. It's about scientific problems, not about logical problems. I'm actually, I answered you by saying it's a medrash because the medrash gives the reason behind it. But I'm thinking now the reason is probably inherent in the Pshat Shlomikra also. So the concept of a man being a namer of things is yeah.
There could have been an alternate system where God said, gracious, this, that, they.
Yeah.
So animals, this was a snake.
I'm thinking your point is right. However you understand the pasuk, even leaving aside the midrashic elements, at the end of the day, it's giving humankind ability to name. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. So that's what I was thinking when I answered this question about the medrash of what he's mechabbing to and so on. But the core idea that man is a namer is a pasuk. You're right. It's a good point. Yeah. I back off my answer to you even without any mystical explanation, midrashic explanations, the core idea is right. Yeah. Okay, we run out of time, so we'll stop here. And in Hashem, next week we will look at resolution of problems. All we've done this week is give ourselves the right to question these things.
The Rav's got no Bechira on
Where the show goes, yeah.
we're not getting anywhere.